Well, Andreas Krieg is an assistant professor at the Defence Studies Department at King's College in London. He joins me now here in the studio in Doha. Nice to have you on the programme. Let's just begin with this potential breakdown of the ceasefire and the situation that we're seeing right now and the diplomacy that's going on. What are you reading into this?
I don't think it's not going to make much of a difference, because this is a counterinsurgency strategy of annihilation, which means even if the ceasefire continues, it's quite simple. I would not trust the Russians or the Iranians to actually let all these rebels leave the pocket and regroup somewhere else and being armed at the same time. Iran, I think, put a lot of pressure on Russia not to let this happen, which means they have to actually kill those people who are still fighting instead of just letting them go, which obviously puts a lot of pressure on the civilians who want to leave, because it's very difficult to differentiate who's a combatant and who is not, who's a civilian.
So you have two scenarios now, one where civilians and fighters are left in East Aleppo, and another option where an amount of people will be allowed to leave the city, whether they be civilians or fighters. If the fighters are left to leave, with or without their weapons, where do they go from here?
Good question. I mean, they've
given a safe passage, that is.
That's exactly. If they've given a safe passage, the question is where they're going to, where's the entry point for them? So probably they will go into Idlib province, because that's where most of the FSA fighters are. It's easier for them to regroup, and they will probably stay put there. So if we move forward in Aleppo, I think what has to be figured out now is how does the Syrian regime, how do the Russians ensure that people who are fleeing to Idlib province are not coming back to fight another day in Aleppo? So they really want to cleanse their territory from any sort of dissidence or opposition, and then fortify this line, whatever line that will be established then, with mines, with checkpoints, to make sure that they don't go and sweep back into the city. And then create a kind of couple of spheres of influences in northern Syria. We have a sphere of influence next to the Euphrates, which is where Turkey is. We have a sphere of influence of Russia and the regime around Aleppo now. We have another sphere of influence around Idlib province, which is where the Free Syrian Army and other factions are fighting. And let's not forget, we still have ISIS in northern Syria that nobody is talking about at the moment. And we have got the Kurds. So all these spheres of influences are now very well established, and then none of them can actually be toppled very easily. So I think what the Russians are trying to do now, and the Iranians as well, is trying to make sure that this sphere of influence that has been established around Aleppo, around this urban center, can be kept for the midterm at least.
Of course, Aleppo has been the heartland, you might say, of the rebellion to start with.
Yes.
And now we're focusing perhaps on Idlib. Can the FSA and can the groups that are anti-Assad, Syrian government really reform and become a force that they were in Aleppo? Is that possible?
No. I mean, even the reason Aleppo fell is because there weren't one force. I mean, even, I would say, the last 2.5 years, we haven't seen one opposition in Syria. I mean, the radicalization of the opposition, the radicalization of the revolution through jihadist movements and very radical Islamist movements has undermined the integrity of that kind of opposition. And the reason for that was because the moderate rebels wouldn't get any support. So you had some of them actually became more radicalized in order to get new funds of revenue and in order to continue fighting. But this kind of factionalization that we've seen now, especially within the Free Syrian Army, within the opposition, which will now move to Idlib, means that even in Idlib, even movements such as Ahrar al-Sham, which used to be very potent, are now breaking apart. If that is happening, we have no common front. And I think the Turks will now move towards Idlib province in order to ensure that at least this part can be kept, and that in kind of putting a lid on the Idlib province at the moment, keeping what is to be kept.
We'll see what does certainly in the next few days now. As for Andreas King, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.